As you're all proving every day, the business and investment communities have quickly realized that capitalizing on renewable energy by investing in renewable energy technologies is no longer just about doing the right thing. It's about making money, creating jobs, and remaining competitive in the world economy. The potential is enormous. Each year, I keep reading the statistics that Ron produces. They're amazing, the growth patterns, and we see no end in sight. I think businesses recognize that efficiency, sustainability, and profits are intertwined. The best companies have all committed themselves to that, and we've seen their leadership on those issues. And at the state and city level, they're also on the front lines of that effort, recognizing the enormous potential of investing in clean energy. And even in fossil, places you don't think of, like California or Oregon or sort of cutting-edge states, states like Texas and Pennsylvania are investing heavily. Traditional fossil fuel producing states heavily in renewable energy. Half of all states in the District of Columbia require electric utilities to generate specified amounts of electricity from renewable energy resources. 17 states have greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. California is clearly the leader here with AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, which mandates reductions in greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. And I think you see also a lot of action in the city, 780 mayors from 50 states, D.C. and Puerto Rico. We work with a lot with our new mayor in D.C. who's doing a great job on this. Ron Dellums in Oakland. Majora was here last night. He's talked a good deal about that. They've joined the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. So when it comes to action on climate and clean energy, I think we see that action from business and state leaders of both parties. And I think finally we're seeing leaps and bounds in Washington itself because, quite frankly, governors and mayors and even people in the private sector can't do it alone. In the fight against global warming, our capacity to realize the full potential of a clean energy alternative future depends on innovation and investment, but it also depends on comprehensive federal policy. And I think that's why you should care about what's going on in the campaign as it unfolds and in politics in Washington as it unfolds. For years, I think there's been a legitimate debate about how to manage carbon emissions, but a consensus has emerged. I think that business needs certainty of a coherent, binding national policy. The current policy framework, which is centered on voluntary reductions, hasn't worked, and I think it doesn't give the private sector the tools it needs for long-term planning, and the valuable energy savings are clearly being left on the table. Our foreign competitors, quite frankly, in this context, I think are outdoing us. I don't know whether Clean Edge would agree with me, but if you look around at the statistics, 10 years ago we had about 44% of the production of the solar market. We're now down to 10 or less. Brazil, which in addition to producing models and changing the over and under odds on the Super Bowl, has joined the U.S. in the production of ethanol. Obviously, I think they've surpassed the U.S. in terms of moving their fleet towards high volume of biofuels. It makes no sense for us to fall behind, and I think legislators understand this. A new consensus on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle are calling for real reductions in greenhouse gases. Nancy Pelosi, I think, should be called out for particular credit in this. When she became Speaker of the House at the beginning of the year, she made clean energy, renewable energy, and climate change part of her top priorities. She created a congressional committee to deal with these important issues that's chaired by Congressman Markey from Massachusetts. I think her sense of urgency is shared by others. Members of this Congress have introduced climate change-related legislation at a faster pace than any previous Congress. Recently, the Senate committee that handles these matters reported the Lieberman-Warner bill, which Jim Rogers talked about, a comprehensive cap-and-trade bill to reduce greenhouse gases. I think the entire Senate is likely to take that up this spring. In my own estimation, it's hard to see that legislation getting to the president's desk and having the president actually sign it while he's in office, but I think we're making good progress there. This past December, Congress passed the Energy Independence and Security Act, which finally raised the CAFE standard mileage standard again to 35 miles per gallon by 2020. That's the first congressionally mandated increase in over 30 years. I have to say with some regret, while we were in the White House, we tried to raise the CAFE standard and were blocked by bipartisan majorities on both sides of the Congress. We never were able to overcome our ability to get the 2/3 necessary to overcome a veto. That will have a significant down payment, I think, on reduction of CO2 emissions. The bill also mandates, this morning was spent on this, an increase in biofuels up from 7.5 billion gallons in 2012 to 36 billion gallons in 2022, with advanced biofuels, cellulosic biofuels, comprising 60% of the total. I was at the House Democratic retreat last week. Vinod Khosla was there. He said that his plant in Georgia is going to be able to is coming online. Will be able to produce bioethanol from cellulose from wood chips at $1.25 a gallon by sometime next year at full production levels. I would add that at that retreat where almost all the Democratic members were there, they spent 4 hours on the topics of this conference and related topics of infrastructure investment in the United States. Probably spent an hour on the housing crisis. Now, those of you who are in finance, you could judge whether that was the right balance. But I think that the political community is clearly, I think, centered on this. And I think it's a safe bet that regardless of who controls Congress or becomes the next president, we'll see legislation that puts a lid on carbon emissions within the next few years, which gets me back to my earlier point about the presidential candidates. I think if you look at the platforms of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, they've got bold, comprehensive plans to deal with global warming and energy security. They're talking about 80% reductions below 1990 levels by 2050. They've been strong advocates for investing in clean energy technology. And while some of the Republicans still haven't warmed up to addressing this issue, they're still kind of living in denial, Senator John McCain clearly supports a cap-and-trade system and has been a strong advocate for action on climate change. I'm enough of a Democrat that I don't want to suggest that there are no differences between Clinton and Obama on one hand and McCain on the other. I recommend actually you go to their websites. There are stark differences. Both Hillary and Obama have more than 10, 15 pages, single-spaced, detailed policy prescriptions, ideas for public-private partnerships, new investment opportunities. Obama has 2 pages on green buildings. Hillary goes into kind of similar depth on modernizing the grid. I think if you've actually watched them at their town meetings, they could be running seminars at this conference on the future of geothermal power or the promise of carbon reduction through a new mortgage association that invests in clean buildings. In contrast, Senator McCain has 5 paragraphs on his website. It tilts heavily towards the expansion of nuclear power. But given the pressure, I think, on him from the conservative side of his party, the place where he struggled to get acceptance, I think it's significant that he's never walked away from his commitment to put a price on carbon and to cap emissions. I think one could argue about who has better overall policy, but I think that's a very significant fact in American politics today. I think these candidates understand that the next president needs to take decisive steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and dramatically change our energy policy. Public's right there with them. There's no question about that. We've done extensive polling on this. This has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. I think it's partly related to the run up in the price of gasoline and the price of oil, but it's very much related to the public being much more clued into the question of climate change and the need to doing something about that.